Hi everyone, welcome to another week of the Philly Brutes Rugby Roundtable, and it's an absolute pleasure to be joined by the one and only Dan Cottrell. How are you, Dan?
I'm very well. Thank you for the invite, Sean.
No, thank you for taking it up. If you're like me, I'm a massive rugby nose and have been getting Rugby World for forever, and signed up without any sort of wanting to be a coach to Rugby Coach Weekly about 15 years ago, and every day been getting emails from this guy. So it's an absolute pleasure to actually get to chat rugby with you.
Well, if you're chatty, it means probably I'm not developing another email to send out to you. So I do get known as you're the guy who sends out all the emails. So yes, we do send out a few emails, not as many as we used to. But apologies for people who find their inboxes are full of my
I never
ramblings.
apologise. Never apologise. So, how has the last sort of 12 months been for you?
Well, I think like everybody else, I think it's been interesting, challenging. It has been a chance for us to reflect on what we do and how we put things together in terms of Rugby Coach Weekly, and that has been, in many ways, very useful time because we've been able to develop some different products, different ways to engage with coaches, and coaches generally have been responding very well because I think a lot of people recognise the importance of sport and, more importantly, the importance of connections. And perhaps something we'll talk about as we go along. But those connections have been very difficult to maintain in the best way. And we're virtual now, but I expect that a lot of people have really enjoyed the last couple of weeks when they've been out and about just in life, let alone on a rugby field, and just being themselves and not feeling that they've got to be something that they're not. And I think you're a lot more forgiving when you're in front of somebody because you can see the nuances and the changes in attitude very, very quickly, and you can read those ideas. So, in those terms, we've had some exciting things happen in Rugby Coach Weekly. We've just launched the. Well, it sounds like a sales pitch now, but apologies for that. We just relaunched the weekly magazine again, which we stopped a couple of years ago, but we're keen to put that back out there, and that's going to be fun because we've got some very interesting coaches we're talking to, and I mean the big thing really is not that, more that we've at long last put our rugby coaching hats into the women's rugby coaching ring properly. We have had quite a lot of content on there, but now we've got a monthly magazine, and Jess Bunyard is our editor, and she's doing a brilliant job. She's very excited about everything, which is fantastic. But she's been talking to some really great coaches just about women's rugby, and I think that's also been exciting. So I mean, inevitably, lots of challenges for lots of people, and not everything has been a bed of roses, inevitably, in a pandemic. But also, we're quite positive about some of the things which have been happening for us.
How much with the sort of the roadmaps and the lockdowns changing sort of constantly? How much adaptation have you had to do to various things that you're putting out, or sort of how has that been affected by the various lockdowns and roadmaps and all that?
And I think it has changed. Initially, we just did as we did, and people came back to us and says, "Well, we're not actually training." And I mean, that sounds obvious, but it does. And we're not necessarily a super tanker, which takes a long time to turn. But we changed our output into very start off with a lot more about coaching practice. We launched some coaching classrooms so people could actually Zoom with their teams. So that was the first thing we did. And then as the roadmaps came out, we tried to adapt. Once we tried to, we just went out to coaches and say, "What are you doing, or how are you approaching this?" And we put together various small-sided games, small-sided exercises. Um, I mean, I think the most important thing is that uh, every coach faces individual challenges. I mean, it's very easy to generalize and come up with ideas which would work for a very um, well organized and keen, enthusiastic team, but not everybody faces that. We were talking to coaches saying, I've got a team of 18 here, and 6 of them are on Zoom every Friday with me, and we are coming up with the most amazing stuff. 6 sometimes are there, and 6 are just not there for a variety of reasons. And that's been a massive challenge for coaches. I mean, generally, it's a challenge for grassroots coaches to adapt to their group, but here it was in much greater relief. So we've adapted what we've done, and we've tried to match what we think coaches have wanted, but also tried to help coaches see a way through. And it's very much about listening and adapting ourselves and understanding that. One of the main things that all the dangers that can come across is that it's Dan Cottrell writing for Rugby Coach Weekly, and I'm very keen not to be that. I've got views on lots of things, but actually there's far more than one way to do it, and we've tried to reflect that particularly this year in what we're doing, trying to gather ideas that may not be the ones that we would choose. So somebody might say, well, you need to have more games on there, or you need to have more drills on there, and we could go into a great debate about that. Well, let's just put some stuff out there, and you've got to decide what works for you, what fits in with how you want to coach, and then maybe change as you want to go on. We don't want to evangelize. Well, the only evangelization we want to do is just get players onto the pitch, and I know this speaks very much to your own feelings. And I very luckily did an interview this week with UK Coaching about this. And one of my messages is really for all coaches, just be there. Don't worry too much about whether you're fully prepared, because if you're not there, then the players are not there, and if the players are not there, then that has an impact on other teams, and we don't want to have the sort of reverse domino effect of players not turning up, teams not then functioning, so other teams not functioning. We want to try and get there, do things, and be proactive. So in a sense, we have changed. We've tried to keep to some principles, but hopefully now we're going to be back into what I hope is traditional rugby. And I think one of my own, if I was to evangelize about anything, second evangelization point would be that don't think we need to adapt rugby. Rugby is already pretty good. I mean, it could change a little bit, but if we keep changing things, people lose the sense of what they're doing there. Let's be creative about what we've got already, and then let the players and the coaches be creative around that structure, rather than saying let's add in little bits and pieces. Inevitably, with COVID rules in place, we have to adapt to have safe rugby. What that looks like and whether that's exactly right, well, we're not going to tell. We're right in the middle of a pandemic, and it's maybe going to take years before we know whether we did the right things or the wrong things. But let's try and move back to, well, whatever age group you're in, the 12-a-side, the 15-a-side game, without too much change to what was the game, because scrums, mauls, lineouts are just as much a part of the game as that fancy flip offload and all those wonderful parts of the game too.
Do you think from everything that's been sort of everyone's been at home watching stuff on Zoom and webinars and stuff, are we going to get a better, more knowledgeable group of amateurs?
Yeah, I think we will. I don't think there's any doubt that it's created a great deal more reflection from coaches and a lot more access to great coaches. I mean, there's been some fantastic stuff out there. Eddie Jones, someone said today, Eddie Jones seems to be on a podcast every other day. But there've been great stuff. The Magic Academy have been running something pretty much every week, which has brought in some fantastic influences and coaches. The Loosehead podcast has also done things, and I mean, obviously we're in that space as well. One of the great things that I feel we've been able to do is get a guy called Phil Llewellyn to do his Roundup Rodeo, which is he's got 2 to 3 coaches in who've just been reflecting on that and the learning. So I think there has been a great body of learning going on for a number of coaches. What would be really interesting to see is how many coaches that actually reached and how many have reflected on it. Probably those coaches would have been doing those things already, or some of them. So they've filled their boots to coin a phrase, which were already full. And it's the coaches on the edges. Have they been able to access this? When I say been able to, have they had the desire to? And I think if you spent a day Zooming and online, and then someone says, "All right, the club is putting something on in the evening," you might just be thinking, "I've just had enough time of it." And then you get this. I mean, this is what a Zoom meeting can look like. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry, it's my turn now. So what was the point again? And there are dangers of that. So it has been fantastic, and I think it's created some debates. I think it's also stirred a few pots which didn't need to be stirred, and created some angry reflection on some positives, which has been a great pity. I think it's sad when
In what way?
people. Well, I think there's been a certain amount of argument over the ecological dynamical approach to. I hope you don't want me to explain it. I can explain it, but not probably in the way that it should be explained. So that has been I think, a very interesting and worthwhile part of the game. But others have found that more difficult, and then each side seems to want to battle over it. And I think that's a great pity, because there's definitely more than one way to skin this cat of coaching. Am I allowed to say that? Is that catist? I love cats, by the way. Some of my best friends are cats, and it'd been better if people were debating it to get a better understanding, and that's. I mean, it's a bit like in rugby, really. You break yourself a little bit to mend yourself better, and that's a better way of doing it. And I think some coaches on the periphery, and I think a number of coaches on the periphery, and I hope I'm part of it, and a number of coaches are saying, yeah, I've enjoyed that, and I'm taking this to my next training session. But there are others who've become very frustrated by it, and I think that's a great pity, because coaching should be about positivity. I think also the danger is that we keep trying to imagine ourselves as the coach in The Last Dance, or all sorts of places, and we forget that often a good coach is not the one who has the best players. He's done some other things. I mean, this could be controversial, and apologies to Liverpool fans, but is Jurgen Klopp as good a coach as everyone's made out because he's a bit further down the table? That's completely the wrong way to see it. There's no doubt he's a very fine coach. That he won a championship with players who the best players is a different thing. So I think we try and imagine ourselves to be those people and measure ourselves against their successes, and that's the wrong way. And one of the things I think has come out a lot from what people have said during the lockdown is coaching is all about relationships. The fact that we're on a Zoom now is powerful in one way, but it's not the same as that interaction that we might have when we catch each other in what has been termed as like the corridor meetings, where there's no formal conversation. It's that informal one as you meet and say, "Oh, how are you going?" And then you just notice something. I just meant to ask about this, or. But of course, those meetings are fantastic, but they're also dangerous. So, for example, this week, I sort of had a corridor conversation with one of the players at the local club I'm working at, and afterwards I was thinking, I almost gave him too much information. He's going to go away thinking, "Oh, I've just had that conversation. What does that mean to me?" And that's just as dangerous. So you have to manage these things. I mean, it's wonderful to be back, and it's great because you get but it's still hard work. You still have to think, reflect, pick your moments.
So sort of that is communication, now that we're in a sort of human to human environment rather than human to Zoom. How much is communication going to be really, really key?
Well, in a sense, the word communication is so many different things, and so, to different people, that it's always going to be key, but it's how you do it, when you do it, and what's behind it. Um, Forgive my mispronunciation. Steve Rolnick wrote a very good book, or produced a very good book with his team about um, those sorts of conversations and interviews that you have, motivational ones, and within it you can just hear the language that you need to use, but also pick your moments. There's also a very good book by Stone and Sheen on positive feedback, and that's how you take feedback. So it's all very well for me to think that I've cracked communication, but the person on the other end of the communication has also got to have worked hard to listen to what I've said and why I've said it and know where I'm coming from. And yeah, I've got to help them, but they've got to help themselves. So we're all sensitive to certain amounts of communication, and uh, it is that two-way process that everybody's got to get more involved in. But it it will change. I feel that the very fact that people can jump onto Zooms, or some sort of electronic method of communication, may reduce some of the meetings that we have. It may also create some. I'm sure that people say, well, why am I having this Zoom meeting when all you need to do is send me an email and 10 people are in the room and they're all doing what I was just doing. I'm just checking my phone or just doing my Candy Crush until the moment that I'm required. So maybe we need to take a bit of a breath and think, what does it mean to me, and how do I listen? Not how do I speak, but how do I listen? I suppose that would be the clever answer, if I could rewind to what you said at the start, would be, how do I improve my listening? And how do I then take out of it what's important, and then return to you? I suppose back to you. I mean, you there you are. You're creating this fantastic way of players communicating with clubs and clubs growing. How do you feel it's changed, or does it need to change?
I don't know if it needs to change, because actually I think, especially over the last 12 months, I think clubs have definitely stepped up their communication games, whether it's social media or, I think they've been really, really great in what they've put out. People are putting out their challenges or the training stuff that they've been doing, and or just interacting with their own local community. So I think it's actually changed over the last 12 months, and I think it's changed for the better. But obviously there is so much more that clubs could be doing. What
For
that
instance,
entails.
yeah. Well, so what does that entail?
I don't know. Look, I'll take my club for example. My club has done very little in the way of communicating with anybody over the last 12 months. We'll have a Friday night Zoom call for the first 6 months. It will be the same 10 people on board every week, and now, it's non-existent, and it's the same 5 people that have turned up to training on a Saturday morning. So, there's definitely some improvements that I know that we could do. Like we've got, there's been no communication about training sessions or calling up people to find out what's going on. There's been very little social media stuff, and I'm not trying to throw them under the bus, because I love them to pieces, but a club like ours isn't going to grow or even possibly survive if no one knows or hears from us or that type of thing. Whereas on the opposite side of that, there are some clubs that are doing amazing stuff, that are, whether it's just putting out posts every day or sending out news items to even like websites like mine, they'll send a news item, and they're keeping themselves in relevance. I guess that's the word, relevant. Sports clubs could have quite easily have disappeared over the last 12 months, but because of the work that clubs have put in to keep themselves relevant and interested and interactive, then it's all good. It's all good things.
I think the
If,
challenge within that is that getting back to actually playing a game. Uh,
mm,
uh, I mean, training is fantastic and it's great, but really you want to have the excitement of traveling somewhere to play a game and playing
of course,
a
yeah,
relevant game. I think that what's going to happen is that clubs are going to find themselves in the wrong leagues because the same players aren't going to be there again, and you're going to have the 92 nils, which sometimes you get. I mean, certainly in the women's game, one of the difficulties has been trying to get that balance right, and that's been hard. It's challenging. It's getting better, and therefore, if you're on the end of one of those, nobody really gains.
no,
So this is there's going to be a period of refinding your level. I mean, I got to understand that the English Rugby League is the largest in the world in terms of the way that you can be right at the bottom and you could work your way back up to the
yeah,
top. I mean, I know Richmond did it the other way, and
yeah.
we
And
so,
London Welsh are doing it now.
yeah, and they've got themselves back into contention. I certainly remember playing Richmond. Um, I played at Cranley Rugby Club when I was
This is
teaching.
just down the road from where I am.
Right, okay, which was brilliant. I was very, very lucky, but we came up against Richmond, who were 2 seasons on the way back up, and it was a great game in some ways, but it was very typical grassroots. We turned up with a mixture of A and B players because there was a wedding that weekend, so you guys got to go to the wedding,
Yeah,
and we came up against the Richmond. Some of them were still semi-pros. There was an announcer. We were 3-0 ahead after about 3 minutes. I'd like to think I kicked the goal, and we lost 112-3 or something like that. And having an announcer saying, and that is the fourth try for Brian Smith, which makes the score 88-3, was the way that sometimes these things work. I mean, having the announcer is probably the most painful part of it. But I think
but
that
don't you think on that? Don't you think on that though? You said the 92 nils, the things like that, those types of experiences, they live with you because you remember it,
well,
and
yeah,
you could almost the following week. I'm sure you were. Would you not think that you were? You just had to play. You've just played against the almighty Richmond. You've learned a little. You've got to hide him, but you know that these guys are just rugby players. Uh, you know that with that experience, and you'll be better for it. Is that
well,
not a
yeah, I
thing you
think
can
that's
think
true.
about?
Yeah, I think given at the time, what I was probably about 33, 34 at the time, and I'd played enough rugby to know that that was the way things go. But for others, they may not have been able to reflect so well. So I think, Sean, that would be the way that you'd hope everyone would be. But as I said earlier, I mean, your team is made up of a whole mishmash of people with different ideas, and some of them would have found that probably the worst experience of their life and would be terrified to ever play rugby again. So I'm not saying it's ever going to be a bad thing that you're going to be on the end of that for everybody, but it you'd want to play against teams where it's roughly even, and
Yeah,
that's what the league system does. However, my guess is, and if we reconvene this time next year, it was interesting to see if we looked at the league tables whether some sides were strong. I mean, it happens all the time where one team in a league just crumbles right from the start. A couple of key players leave. I mean, certainly playing uh, in Cranley was in Surrey one. It would be very much a case of if a couple of players from a team were not there for a few weeks, then they would be absolutely the shell of the side, and that's the way it is. I mean, to a certain extent, you could probably see that at international level. A couple of key players can make, I mean, not a 30-point difference, but they can make a significant difference. I mean, I expect there's players that Eddie or Warren would like to have out there every single time, and others they can say, well, we've got some depth in this.
On that, then the Six Nations, obviously, the Eddie stuck to his guns and stuck to his sort of tried and tested. Is that not a reflection of what you just said there? Eddie wanted the key players on the pitch, even if they hadn't had the game time that he would have liked to have had. The Owen Farrells, Maro Toji, the Vinopolas, Elliot Daly. They didn't have the game time that they would have had, but he still needed to pick them because they were his key guys, rather than going to, as you just said, the depth.
Well, I mean, it's Ben Darwin, who played for Australia back in the early 2000s, has done a lot of work on team cohesion. And he might argue that if you bring in a lot of new players, even if they may be on paper doing better, this may break the cohesion of the team. Now, of course, the counter argument is that with those players, they didn't look cohesive and it didn't work. So perhaps Eddie had that in his mind. I mean, the thing is that they've got an enormous amount of data with them. They've got an experienced coaching group. And to a certain extent, Eddie's had a lot of success. So he must have had some form of plan. I mean, frankly, I wouldn't have picked the team that he picked. But I mean, that's one of the joys of international rugby. Everyone will pick a different team, and there'll be plenty of speculation over the Lions team. And I very much doubt that the Lions team will be the best team in terms of the stats, in terms of the best player in their position. It's far more important for them to fit together as a group and play the style that Warren Gatland feels is going to win him the 3 matches against the Springboks, and that's his call, and he's been successful in that. I wouldn't have picked his Lions team the previous time and the previous time before that, but he was successful with it, and he played a style which I wouldn't have wanted to play. But again, he's got something he wants to do and a way he wants to achieve it, and so that's great. I mean, would it be very boring if everyone said this is exactly what it is and everyone agreed, and it would take away some of the enjoyment of it? I mean, I suppose then I'd like to get what your opinions, because I can see you've got a couple of rugby shirts behind you in there. I saw that the Lions.
So that's my rugby club there. Oh no, where are we? There. I've got this mirrors. That's my rugby club, Rachel Decker. We did a competition called the Smallest Club World Cup, which.
Oh yes, I remember that. Yeah.
Which was a load of in the 2015 World Cup. So that's my shirt from that day. And then this one here is it was our club's 60th anniversary. So we put a Barbarians team together, and we called it the Philly Roots Barbarians. And we sold all the shirts and gave all the money to St George's Hospital, because one of our players at the time was in there with a broken back, and they looked after him forever for a long time. So yeah, they're my bits. On the Lions, I guess I think this time around, because it's going to be a smaller squad, does that come back to it's easier to coach a 36-man squad rather than a 46-man squad, especially in the time frame that he's got, and he isn't going to have enough time to, as you said, cohesion, get them all together properly. Is the smaller squad better for that, or would you have rather him take a bigger 46-man?
I think a smaller squad is much better. I mean, if you've got a lot of games, you need to have some depth on the tour, and it's often the case that they have to bring players out. I mean, it didn't do the Lions brand any good when they had to bring players in who happened to be local, and
Shane
I
Williams,
felt sorry for the
geography.
Well, no, I mean, it just didn't quite
didn't fit.
No, and I thought that was slightly unfortunate, and the attrition rate of tours means that you do need to take a big squad. Listening to the podcast that we've been doing on the final, which is about the 2014 Women's World Cup final. The England went out to play in a tournament in the US, and they had to they changed their training because they didn't have enough props, just in case if they lost one or two props, they would have to dropped out of the tournament. So these are the considerations. I mean, I don't know if other coaches feel this, but I can remember watching games and spending most of my time nervous of losing players, because we were losing players all the time to injuries, and every single week we seemed to lose another player, and it was awful. It was a terrible feeling, and it made the game less enjoyable from a coaching point of view, just because players were getting injured, and it's sad for them, because when you get injured, it's the trauma is not just the hurt of the broken bone or the pulled muscle, but it's the mental trauma of when will I play again, and how long will it take me to get back?
Doddy Weir on the tour in '97. When you see him being told that his tour was over, and you just see him just try and come to terms with that type of thing.
Yeah, and that's why players then are taken off the tour. I think there was one famous player, England player, a guy called Bond, I think it was, who was such a good tourist that I think he broke his leg on the tour, but they kept him on the tour because he was such good value. But I think generally, then it's not good to have them around, because then, of course, everybody feels sorry for them, and then they've got to go. So now the question I was going to ask you about the shirts was that I see that the Lions shirt is something like £105, and I felt I think that's a bit of a kick in the teeth myself. I understand that revenue needs to be raised for it, but
yeah,
I
feel that I can't upset. I'm not allowed to upset Canterbury because we've got something lined up.
Oh no! But, you want to cut that bit out? Then, but I mean,
we've got something lined up for the Lions tour, so I can't. And my thing is with that is that there was a shirt in November out for Christmas that was still 80, 90 quid, and it's still still on some websites it's still that amount of money, and now something slightly different is it's got different detailing in, which and it's it's £105, and I don't necessarily think that's Canterbury's or the Lions' fault. I think that's the fault of commercialisation in sport. If you look at a football shirt, if you look at a Chelsea football shirt these days, there are four shirts, and there are three different editions of each shirt. There'll be a stadium edition, which is the casual, cheaper replica. Then there'll be the match fit, which is slightly tighter, giving you that sort of match fit. And then there'll be authentic, which will be 120 quid for a shirt, and that's the one that the players wear. So I don't think this is it's not a fault of Canterbury or the Lions themselves. I think it's just the commercialisation of sport. It's got to that point now. My kids have got my kids are Chelsea fans for whatever reason. But there's four Chelsea kits this year. So if you were to buy all of them, that's almost 400 quid a shirt.
Yeah.
So
well, I mean,
and don't forget the Lions is the cash cow. Lions, maybe not this time around because of the tour maybe not necessarily being what it should be or could have been. But I think it's just the commercialisation of professional sport more than anything.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I'm not being squeamish about the fact that it has to turn some money in order to provide money in elsewhere. But I think probably go back to something you said earlier on. Cash is helpful, but really what makes rugby clubs is the individuals within it, because Definitely. They're the one who drive things forward. I'm very lucky in the role I've got, is that I'm able to talk to lots of coaches from lots of clubs, and they're incredible what they do. Unpaid volunteers, and they are saying, well, we're doing this, we're doing that, and we're creating this. And you can see they've got lots and lots of teams, lots of coaches, lots of players. And it's done because they've got a genuine love for the game. And they will be sitting at their computer, probably this morning, doing a database in order to make sure that everything is right for tomorrow. And they'll be checking people on doing first aid and all those sorts of things. And that is the difference. And yes, cash is important, but if you gave them £100 to do it, or £100 a week, I mean, of course, they wouldn't say no to it, but it wouldn't be the reason why they did it. And sport is a lot about what I think sometimes we call the plumbers, the people who fix the stuff underneath these floors, behind the walls, which all the unseen work, which makes sure that at the front we get running water or we get teams on the pitch. And if you can get 15 players out every Saturday, or get 12 players out every Sunday morning, that is the thing that should be remembered. I mean, if you can coach them as well, brilliant. But I think we've all been there when we're on the phone. Are you going to be there? What is it this morning? Is it? And or have you checked in with this person? I mean, these days WhatsApp saves a hell of a lot of problems, and of course there's lots of very good apps to run teams as well, which make it a lot easier. But you still got to try and persuade those. I mean, you're going to have your core lot who are going to be there right at the start, and they're going to be rushing around and that sort of thing. But it's the one or two players who end up having to play wing for this week. Well, I'm on the wing again on November. No, it's just brilliant. Yeah, we'll pass you the ball once in the match, and I've got to play prop again. I mean, I used to love the games. I used to when I was at university, come back at the weekend, ring up a brilliant guy called Adam Brooks, who was exactly that sort of guy. There's two guys. There was a guy called Martin Boot, another guy called Adam Brooks, and they were the ultimate fixers in terms of getting teams out. And I never knew what position I was going to play until I arrived, and I would sort of wait with bated breath as what shirt I would be putting on. I mean, they didn't put me in the front row, thankfully, but I played pretty much every other position, and it was brilliant, and I loved it, and it was some of the best experiences I had were turning up, meeting people I'd not seen since last week because I'd been away at university, and Dan, you're going to be playing this week, you're going to be outside centre, and it'd be great, excellent, I'd love to wear that fit. I mean, the great thing of seeing your number and putting your number on is one of the great joys of rugby. So it's nearly 20 years since I played my last game, and I just suddenly think I would be quite nice just to pull on a shirt with a number on and think, today I'm this position.
Do it.
No, I can't do it. I break.
A long time. Questions for me, that just a couple more, because I don't want to take up too much more of your time. If you were to give a rugby club a blank piece of paper and say, look, this is what would be the one thing you'd tell them to focus on now that we're coming out of lockdowns?
Well, I would try and get it put it in the right language, but I think you've got to have what we might call a shared mental model or a shared game model, which means that everybody has an understanding of where you're going to go, shares the same language. So when you say we're going to be doing this, everyone says, I know why I'm doing this. So, for instance, some of the things we've been talking about is just getting players on the pitch. Now, what does that look like? How are we going to do that? If everyone is focused on that, then you get that done. And then you say, right, now we've got them on the pitch. Let's create some plays around that. So, okay, what do they look like? So I would say on the blank piece of paper is write down the things that everybody agrees on and then stick to them and then keep coming back to them. So why did we make that decision? Does that help us put players on the pitch if that's what we want to do, first of all? Does that help us develop the coaches that we want to develop? And then when you're breaking it down into the sort of component parts from a coaching point of view, right, this week we're going to concentrate on tackling and passing. Okay, so what does that look like? What do the players need to do that? And what are you trying to achieve by the end of it? and you might say, well, we're trying to create this sort of team, and then you can check off every single time, because otherwise you can quite easily make 60 decisions, which could be great decisions, but they cross against each other. Some cancel out. Much better to make 3 or 4 decisions which everybody is on board with, or roughly on board with. I mean, you're not going to get everyone to agree. I mean, there's no such thing as a team of 15 players who agree on the way to play the game, and more boring it would be if that was the case.
Absolutely.
So there we are. That was, I would say, the blank piece of paper, shared language, shared goals.
Lovely. So finally, the one question that we ask every person that comes on the show is for one hope and one fear for either yourself or the sport over the next 12 months.
Okay, so I mean, apart from my hope that I get to single figures golf handicap, I think what I would hope is that rugby continues to be positive. And there's always a great danger that it can become negative. People argue about, I mean, the Lions Tour, I'm not looking forward to the parts where people argue over selection or argue over the referee's decisions. Just remember that it's a game, that there's another game next week. Now, the problem with the Lions Tour, it's every 4 years, so there's a finality about it. So when we come to the last test, there won't be another test for that group of players ever again. But in rugby terms, most players will have a game next week, and that's so there's no point in getting too worried about this week. Just move on to next week. So my hope is that we keep sports positive. Games are games. They have some importance. They do define us to a certain extent. But let's enjoy the competition. Let's play to win, but put winning in the right context. And winning shouldn't be dark days hidden away. And you know that does happen. And there's a lot of very important stuff's been going about mental health, and we've got to try and remove that sort of dark days type attitude and say, right, okay, we learnt this week 92-0, not such a good week for us. Let's try and keep it down to under 50 next week. So that's my hope. I suppose that sort of catches up with my fear, really, is that sports seen as a way out or as a great panacea, and it's not. It's just another part of our lives. It's great, but it's not the be all and end all. The be all and end all is there maybe is a greater power above us, which is just going to tell us what we should be doing, and that would be interesting to explore in maybe a different sort of podcast. But it matters, but it doesn't matter that much. Lots of other things matter. So my fear is that people are going to say, well, the way out is sport, and everyone should be. No, it is. It's great, and the fact that we're enjoying having this chat here is exactly what sports should be about. And of course, this is going to define my weekend, because it's the most important part of my weekend. Sean, thank you very much for inviting me on. Of course it is. But it's going to be one part of, like I say, a fun-filled weekend. You see my first shot on the tee at 1:30 today, and that could be fun-filled or wrapping the club around somebody. It's just, we just got to put things in their right context. So yeah, my fear is that people will make it something fantastic and then be constantly disappointed, when in fact, just take little bits of enjoyment out as we go along, and take a step at a time, and all those sorts of things that people often say. But it's great, but it's not everything.
Well, that's a perfect way to end. So, Dan, I really appreciate you giving up your Saturday morning to come and chat to me. Hopefully, we'll meet up in person or have a beer in person hopefully very soon. and we can continue to put the rugby world to rights. Because
Exactly.
I've absolutely loved the last 45 minutes. It's absolutely been an absolute pleasure. So thank you very much.
Oh, thanks, Sean. Thanks very much for the opportunity. And I think, I mean, all the things that you're doing and the ideas behind it is part of what we were talking about in terms of getting the players onto the pitch. And for me, that's absolutely the most important thing. The coaching bit's the bonus.
Lovely. Well, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you again soon. Cheers.